Carl, let's get right after this idea of expanding the college football playoff and our interests in the group of five, which we'll always hold up to the light. Do you think in this expansion, the group of five, is he going to get a guaranteed spot as a group, or perhaps Oresco and his ideas of expanding the AAC would be more likely? What do you say?
Well, I know that the American is still that's still their goal, is to get to get into the relationship association, as the sixth guaranteed conference, and I know that he's working towards that. As far as the other four, we know that Craig Thompson is on the working group and is representing the group of five, but really kind of representing the four. More than likely, Mike is trying to do some work on his own, and rightfully so, to position the American. But in the overall, how do we treat the group of five going forward? Right now, in these early stages, Jeff, I don't think that's necessarily a priority for the other five commissioners. I think that they need to get consensus among themselves as to what the playoff model is going to be, and then once they can agree, then they'll come back and try to figure out how to include the group of five, both access wise, financially, and I know that there will be opposition to just a across the board guaranteed spot for the highest ranked group of five champion. That there will be those who will require some type of performance standard. And prior to the CFP, there were performance standards,
right,
starting with rank number 6, then it went to number 12. CFP comes and for the first time, the group of five gets an automatic, so to speak, into
the New Year's Day 6.
Not the New Year's Day 6. So
right. So the
I
top 12,
still
almost. Yeah.
Top 12, yeah.
Yeah. So right now you could say they have a position in a 12 team arrangement. It's not a playoff, an arrangement. And
Right.
if it goes to 8, which is where most of the speculation is focusing, will it even be considered, and how do they put it into consideration? Is it purely the numbers from the networks that will tell them each team they add will add so much money? Well, of course, if you add one of those schools, it's a romantic number because there's the NCAA March Madness, little guy storyline that everybody loves, and that'd be great. You guys should do that. I mean, is it that type of thing, or is it something else?
Well, first of all, I think that as we've seen the evolution of BCS to CFP, the group of five really did not provide any additional value. That ESPN was going to pay X regardless of whether the group of five had a place in the structure or not. Has the value of the group of five increased over the last 5 years? And I think that the public perception says yes, but whether or not the television entities will notice it or evaluate the group of five as a single entity, and that it's worth so much. But it's going to be, historically, the group of five has been brought along as a way to keep the 10 FBS conferences under the same tent. And when it went from BCS to CFP, the group of five benefited greatly. The access, the guaranteed access, was something they'd never had before. The money that was increased was significant in terms of, and that was not the networks that determined, the $90 million that you see reported that the group of five receives. ESPN did not determine that number. That was a number that was negotiated by the commissioners.
Sure.
I represented the group of five during those negotiations. Slive negotiated on behalf of the group of five back in 2012, 13, leading up to 2014.
You mean the Power Five?
And the Power Five, excuse
Yeah.
me, the Power Five. And we arrived at this 22%, 23% of whatever the ESPN number was the 475 million averaged over the length of the duration. And so that didn't have anything to do with ESPN. And going forward, will they factor in the group of five in how they determine what an 8-team playoff looks like? I mean, it could be, Jeff, a matter of ESPN saying, if it's strictly 8 at large, the 8 best teams.
Sure.
ESPN may say, we will give you X $100 million. If it's 5 champions and 3 at large, it may not be as much as 8 at large. And if it's the 5 champions, along with a guaranteed spot for a group of 5 without any performance standard, that may be less. ESPN may offer less for that model than the others.
And to be clear, Karl, the performance standard has to do with rankings, right? And you have to be so
Correct.
high, and I don't think it has to do with your actual record. It comes to a ranking, and we've had where you had to be top 16, and I don't want to go down all of those hoops that they asked the group of 5 to jump through, but nonetheless, that was there. Now, we have a lot of impact here, and since you were on the negotiation side of getting the group of 5 cut in on the older deals before the CFP, how does the group of 5 slice of the pie, Karl, get potentially impacted if they go to 8 teams and the money gets bigger? Do they leave it at 22%? Do they slide it down? How does the conversation sound?
I think in today's environment, where the 65 athletic directors of those 5 Power 5 conferences are trying to balance their COVID related impact into their budgets, those athletic directors are going to want to get every dollar they can. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's safe to say that there will be some of those Power 5 athletic directors who will question, how much does the group of 5 deserve to get? And what is that? What is the value of the group of 5 to the overall structure and the overall property, the sports property? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of athletic directors in the group, in the Power 5, who weren't there back in 2012 when the 14 playoff was created, and the amount of money was carved out for the group of 5. And I've heard that there are ADs today saying, how did they arrive at that number, and why did they arrive at that number? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a pretty big chunk.
Mm-hmm.
Almost $100 million off the top is going to, well, it is when you count the APR money, it's well
Sure.
over $100 million that goes to the group of five today.
Mm-hmm. And so they could look at that, especially in in another year, there'll be some financial recovery. It still won't be where it was. And so they're still going to have a money hungry attitude towards
Yeah.
everything. I think a lot of us have assumed all of this will happen. And a lot of the assumptions, Karl, to me, seem like they're based on if you do anything to Eastern Michigan or Western Michigan or Ohio University or Miami of Ohio, and cut them out, Mr. Ohio State or Mr. Michigan, the legislative people in those communities will scream. And it feels like that's the only voice they'll listen to in that room. Do you think that could drive their decision making to say, let's just keep the group of five where they are, give them a little bit of a bump, and be done with it?
I think there's always been some outside pressures, and again, going back to the mid the mid '90s, the mid and late '90s of BYU getting left out of of the postseason, and Orrin Hatch and Mitch
Mm-hmm.
McConnell representing the University of Louisville that had a great season and got left out, and there was saber rattling within Senate, and in Capitol Hill to make it a fairer system. So I think that there's still there will still be pressure. There will still be political pressure to have an inclusive structure, and will it be enough to overcome the perhaps the desire by the Power Five to not be as generous as they were back in 2012 when the $90 million was carved out.
Hmm.
And I think that's a pretty serious, those are some pretty serious conversations that the commissioners are going to have, is just what is the role of the five non-guaranteed conferences. And again, it's probably why the American is so focused on we need to get out of the affiliation with our four other conferences, and we need to be looked at entirely on our own.
Let me ask you this, Karl, when we start talking about the X's and O's of the room and they get a playoff model that they like and they're happy with it, what does a vote look like? And the reports that you brought up about playoff expansion somehow requiring a unanimous vote, how do you describe what that means in that room with those 10? Plus Notre Dame.
Yeah, there's always a need to be collegial inside those rooms, and whether it's the commissioners, whether it's the presidents, that when the playoff went from when the BCS, the 2-team playoff, went to the CFP and the 4-team, there was opposition, and it took well over a year of meetings and discussions and trying to get the Power Five conferences all to agree on what the model needed to be. And even at that time, the conversation had 4 teams, 8 teams, 12 teams, the same conversation that they're having today in terms of the size of the playoff. And there were those who wanted to go to 8 back then. And there were those who wanted to stay at 2 back then. And so was there a compromise? Was 4 a compromise? I think that there was compromise. And at that time, did they all finally say, okay, we will go down this path together and accept this 4-team playoff. We were in the room, the group of five was in the room, and where we were pretty much bystanders in terms of watching and listening, knowing that what those five other commissioners, the direction they wanted to go, we weren't going to oppose anything that they came up with, assuming that they were going to include us. And I think that's probably the same environment that's going to happen. I mean, I was glad to see that there's a commissioner from the group of five, Craig, that's part of the working group.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a good sign.
That there will be. Yeah, I think that's an include that if there hadn't been one on it, I think that would have sent a message. So, I think but again, it's when it comes down to the brass tacks of, will the group of five conferences be able to maintain their existing access and their existing financial payments that are there going forward, kind of at the same level that they are today.
So let's talk about this 8-team playoff if it were to occur. And do we really think that we're going to have a 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, et cetera, format? We're going to have 4 games here and seed them, and every year have the Titans of college football playing the college football playoff group of 5 darling, more than likely, every single year in a play-in game almost. That I think they would be thinking that through. And then where would these games be played? Could they go with another couple of bowl games and throw them in, Karl? Or some are discussing the idea they're going to go to campus bowls. So how do you decipher that? To me, that's where a lot of work needs to be done.
Well, the 1 versus 8, and if the assumption is that the group of 5 is always going to be that number 8 seed, then you're absolutely right that it's Alabama versus Boise State, or Alabama versus Cincinnati, or Alabama versus Coastal Carolina.
Sure, a lot to lose for everybody.
Yeah, and is that a game that ESPN wants to have on that whatever Saturday and Friday or Saturday that there's 4 games.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that and this goes back. I recall a conversation with an ABC executive back in the mid '90s after the BYU exclusion, and the appetite that ESPN ABC had at that time for a playoff. And I remember him telling me, 4-2-1 was how he described, 4 games, 2 games, 1 game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the 8-team model that had the most value, the most television value at that time. That was the model that.
Because you have 6 venues, 4-2-1, you have 6 venues: Orange, Sugar, Rose, Fiesta, Cotton, Peach, and then a separate venue for the national championship game, which could be at one of those places or somewhere else. So you're sort of utilizing the system.
Yeah, he wasn't even looking at it from a venue standpoint, it was strictly the games.
Okay.
If you had the 8 best college football teams,
mm-hmm.
and it was 1 versus 8, 2, 7, 3, 6, 4, 5, that those 4 games would have tremendous value, and which would create 2 semifinal games and the championship game. ESPN, I'm sure, I mean, they're going to run the numbers, and I think that the question that you just raised about the number one team playing, a group of five every year, and
Right.
in one of those quarterfinal games,
Mm-hmm.
probably is something that that they aren't going to embrace entirely.
I think that's a problem, if you ask me.
So,
I think the
yeah.
executives could look at it. Certainly the Power Five guys will say, well, that's a recipe for disaster on some years. Other fans, I don't know that they're always considered at the top of this conversation, but I think that is certainly an instance. What about the bowl system, though, Carl? Because the group of five's kind of in their own world, bowl game-wise, and when the group of five gets a Power Five opponent that's a decent one, it's a great opportunity, and it feels like if it isn't the right group of five opponent, it's a tougher sell. And here we have the expansion potentially from 4 to 8. So another 4 teams, Carl, involved in the college football playoff. That could hurt a couple of bowls.
And that you mentioned the comments by Greg Sankey here in the last day or so about, again, the importance of maintaining the bowl system, or at least the bowls that are important to the SEC. And again, if there is an 8-team playoff, how are the bowls incorporated in that? I hear the fear that meaningless bowl games outside of the 4 quarterfinal games, that those bowl games become less meaningful than they are even today, and what is that going to do from a marketplace standpoint, and the opt-outs and the players that aren't going to be playing, and what will the bowl system look like 5 years from now if there is an 8-team playoff? I don't know how we predict that. I really don't know how to predict whether the bowl system is strong enough to survive as it is today. And we've seen some fan interest and just overall local interest decline. Some people would say that the CFP has already created less meaningful bowl games.
Any threat with the expansion of the playoff structure, Carl, to have these players ultimately get together and suggest that, okay, then we need to play one less regular season game here? You're asking us to play, I don't know, 16 games by then if they have a conference championship game on top of if the national championship, right? Would require a three-game set to win. And if they start looking at that, then the group of five could ultimately lose one of those non-conference paydays with a Power Five, couldn't they?
Well, again, the impact on either the regular season in general, but to be specific as to whether players are going to pull back and demand one less regular season game. When you really evaluate the number of teams out of 130 that would be playing 16 games, is only 2. The final, or might be 4 after once you get to the semifinals. So I think that unlike the NFL that you play 16, they're adding an additional regular season game where all 32 teams are playing an additional game. This is really such a narrow impact on the total number of games. So I don't think that will be a barrier. Again, the the players and the impact on, NIL, and just that if we create a new bowl or a new playoff system that goes from the almost $500 million today to $1 billion, what does that look like in terms of the commercialization of college football, and how that intersects with where we are in today's student athlete need for greater compensation.
We're going to get there. We'll save that conversation. Thanks for going down the college football playoff speculation game. It's going to heat up here, I think, this working group. So appreciate it, Karl.
But I guess the one thing that I would warn the fans, it's not going to happen, in 2 months or 6 months, and it's gonna take a year of massaging and getting everybody to a point where they can all put their hand in the air and say, this will work for. And again, those 5 conferences, the Power 5 conferences, are the ones that are going to determine what the playoff structure looks like. And the other 5 hopefully will be able to be included, in whatever structure that is.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.